Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we are discussing Nicaragua. Last time we discussed Cuba and the revolution there, arguing that, well, it failed, but some people argued that it succeeded. Either way, we argued that in 2015 it came to an end. Today we'll talk about Nicaragua, of course. Nicaragua is a Central American country to emphasize the whole points that I've been doing. Now we could talk about each and every individual country, of course, but alas, that would take a long time. And so I've chosen some specific examples to try to get us through. Remember that Nicaragua in 1909 was ruled by a guy by the name of President Jose Santos Zelaya. Santos Zelaya was trying to become economically independent, and this upset the United States, especially the United States' ideas of trade and security. So as a result, in 1909, we overthrew the government of Nicaragua. This particular cartoon, coming out in 1910, demonstrates very good. Cutting a switch for a bad boy, right? By using, way over here, the justification of the Monroe Doctrine and adding to it the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. When Nicaragua tries to become economically self-sufficient and politically self-sufficient, then, of course, we will cut a switch and tell him, that's not going to happen. So we're going to occupy Nicaragua from 1909 really until 1933 with the U.S. Marines, as you can see here. Now, we are afraid, remember, twin pursuits, trade and security, that Nicaragua is going to become communistic by the 1920s and 30s and 40s. So you got this great cartoon with Uncle Sam. I will save you, Sonny, has recognition of Nicaragua. He wants to extend recognition of Nicaragua, but the problem is that Mexican Soviet communist propaganda is really running Nicaragua to smithereens, right? So we're trying to somehow stop Mexico before we can get to Nicaragua. Well, either way, nobody likes their country to be occupied by a foreign power. And in 1927, a guy by the name of Augusto Cesar Sandino launched a rebellion. And in 1933, when the U.S. Marines withdrew, remember they withdrew because the United States decided that we cannot any longer fund this occupation during a Cold War, and FDR chose to be good neighbors, right? We are good neighbors to our South Americans, our Latin American neighbors. So in 1933, the United States withdrew. Sandino agrees to a ceasefire after the U.S. Marines withdraw. Apples of goodwill. We are going to be good neighbors to our Latin Americans. The person that we put in charge of the National Guard was Anastasio Somoza. Anastasio Somoza, February of 1934, decides that Sandino is too much of a threat and assassinates him. He is going to be a puppet master for a couple of years until he realizes that he'd rather rule by himself, and he established a dictatorship, a dynastic dictatorship, until 1979. The father, Anastasio Somoza, the son, Luis Somoza, the other son, Anastasio Somoza Debayle, a different name there. So they're a family dictatorship, right? Somozas. Well, as a dictatorship, dictatorships are bad, but especially if you're evil and maniacal. The Somozas, they own 20% of the arable land. They own the national airline. They own the National Maritime Fleet. They own most of the nation's businesses and industries. I must apologize real quick. I shouldn't say they were evil and maniacal. They were a dictatorship. All right, so they own much of Nicaragua. Nicaragua. Well, by 1961, a group of revolutionaries, calling themselves the Sandinista Front for National Liberation, the Sandinistas, came to power. Remember the Sandino? These guys are going to take his name and run with it, much like the Zapatistas later on in Mexico. Well, in this revolution, if I go back here, it begins in 1961. Really, the fighting phase begins in 1961. It doesn't end until 1979, right? July of 1979. but that's when it ends. It really ends because a great earthquake hits Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, and the international community sends supplies and everything we can, money especially in supplies, to Nicaragua to help with this earthquake. Kind of like what happened a couple of years ago with Haiti. Everybody's trying to help. Well, in this case, the Sandinistas pocketed the money and said, "Thank you very much." And the international community said, "Well, we gave you this money to help fix the devastated country, not to put in your pocket." And so the international community turned its back on the Somozas, giving the Sandinistas the opportunity they needed to oust the Somozas from power. July of 1971. That is victorious. So they fought the war. Now they can carry out the reforms of the war, right? What they fought for. Land, labor, and education reform. Those three things. But they're going to have to fight it without any money. It's going to be difficult. $2 billion in war damages. 100,000 people were wounded. That includes 40,000 children that were left orphaned and 200,000 people who were left homeless, or families that were left homeless. There were $1.6 million in foreign debt with absolutely no money in their bank accounts. So how are you going to carry out these reforms of a revolution with no money and a lot of debt piling up? It's going to be difficult, and they're going to try their darndest to do it. Remember, one of the key things that came about during the 1950s and 60s and 70s is going to be the inclusion of the church in fighting for these reforms, right? The Vatican II, liberation theology, ecclesiastical-based communities. Well, that is why so many of the revolutionaries in Nicaragua and elsewhere now are going to be churchmen, clerics. In addition to land reform, education reform is especially important. They reduced the illiteracy from 52 to 12%. That's pretty good. They doubled schools. This is one of the key things you can do to reduce illiteracy, right? Have schools. Have libraries, the quintuple libraries. And of course, part of this is going to be expand healthcare. Sick people are not a working people, and sick people are not a going to school people, right? So if you can change the healthcare system, then you could change the educational system. They go hand in hand. And the labor system as well. So by 1986, they have education reform, pretty good, and now they're doing land reform. And of course, they'll do labor reform as well. But land reform, over 5 million acres of land being redistributed, that is revolutionary. Absolutely. Well, guess who does not like this, right? The United States. The United States does not like this one bit. Largely because of the neocolonial system, largely because a lot of the land was owned by the United States, largely because we're fighting against communism, so trade and security. So we first try to destabilize the government, and that's what we're really trying to do. And fighting a Cold War, this becomes especially important. There is a book by Howard Zinn. Now, I am not an extreme leftist or an extreme rightist by any means. And sometimes, though, we got to read books that are not in our comfort zones, and it gives us a good idea on what a new look on things, right? A refreshing look on things. So this is part from his book, A People's History of the American Empire. Here we go. The CIA can organize Somoza's National Guard into a counter-revolutionary force. Reagan says, but the Nicaraguan people hate them. Then we'll base them next door in Honduras. Honduras tends to be a base of operations for many of our overthrowing our movements in Latin America. And so, of course, we're going to use the ousted Somozas to try to oust the Sandinistas from power. October 1984, Congress passed the second in a series of Boland amendments tightening restrictions against funding the Contras. The people that we're funding to fight against the Sandinistas, the Somozas, we now call them the Contras. Contras because they're fighting against the Somozas. No U.S. funds can support directly or indirectly military or paramilitary operations in Nicaragua. 1984, incidentally, is the year in which we start mining the harbors. It's against international law, but in different things to try to overthrow the Nicaraguan government and the system that they have established under the Sandinistas. But how are we going to do this? We can't support anymore. Here's another slide. We have learned that some of the profits from the arms sales to Iran were diverted to the Contras. What? What? Well, see, it just so happens that even though Iran is our enemy, Iran has just ended that embassy hostage crisis. We sell them arms. And then with the money from the arms, we divert it to fight against the Sandinistas. Give it to the Contras. There are so many things wrong with this. This is going to be called the Iran-Contra scandal. And President Reagan is going to convince the media and the American people that he had no idea this was going on, so he's going to stay in power. That just goes to show what a great politician he was, as opposed to other people who could not convince the American people nearly as well. Well, the Iran-Contra scandal, very important. The United States, then, is fighting against Nicaragua, even after this Iran-Contra scandal comes out. But now we're not fighting anymore with paramilitary operations. You can go a long way with dollar diplomacy, with using money. See, in 1984, the president now is this guy, President Daniel Ortega. And we decided what we've got to do, since we can't overthrow them with paramilitary operations, we could overthrow them with money. So we fund a national opposition party who their whole point is to oppose the Sandinistas. They have their first free and open election. They say, if we lose democratically, right? And the people will accept it, right? Well, this political party was financed and advised by the United States CIA. We gave them a lot of money, and with so much money that we gave them, I don't know the exact figures of money, millions of dollars, they were able to win, which demonstrates that people are going to be so tired of war that they will vote for any party that will reestablish peace. After all, by 1990, they are going to be having fought war since 1961. That's what, 29 years of war. That's a long time to be fighting. So why did they win? That's the question. And Violeta Chamorro becomes the next president in 1990. And the reason why is they're fighting against war. They're sick of war in 1990. So if you looked at this, pulled off of Wikipedia, you could see that Daniel Ortega was the first Sandinista to be officially the president, and then is overthrown by the National Opposition Union. A couple political parties come about, the Constitutionalist Liberal Party, and then back in power is the Sandinistas once again. The argument has been said that the economy of Nicaragua has gone downhill as a result of the National Opposition Union, as a result of the overthrow of the Sandinistas. But remember that the overthrow that was, when I was a student in school, believed to have been ended with the Violeta Chamorro, seems to have come back. So do they have the revolution, or are they now turning from revolution to reform? The Sandinistas are in power, but what is it? Well, as of 1990, the average income, right, the gross national income had been going up ever since 1990. As you can see with this dark blue one, all the way up. The question should be, though, what about the masses, right? The country itself is getting richer now, but what about the masses? That is much more difficult to say. All right, that is a Nicaraguan revolution in 15 minutes.